Rutgers Rant. I'm Steve Politi from NJ Advanced Media, joined as always, James Cratch, Keith Sargent. I mean, we've seen some insane games at Rutgers over the years. I don't think we've seen one quite like Rutgers-Michigan in a long time, and, maybe ever. I think it was one of the weirdest games, one of the most exciting games we've seen in a long time, triple overtime. We're going to talk about the play calling in the first overtime, which is a big issue. We're going to talk about Rutgers blowing a double-digit lead and some defensive lapses. But first, I want to start this podcast with a good-spirited debate, just like we did last week, because, Sarge, I was reading the film review, which, like all good journalism, really, sets the agenda for the state of New Jersey once it appears. I'm sure you would agree with that, Sarge.
Completely.
And what I noticed was really a compelling argument by James Cratch that Rutgers fans should be angry at losing this game. And I sort of wrote the opposite thing, that I'm making the list of all the things I thought Rutgers had to accomplish this year. Beating Michigan was certainly not anywhere near it. So it's hard to look at this result, this triple overtime loss against a team that destroyed them in such a fashion last year that the head coach got fired, as anything but a positive. But Cratch, what you said, I think, is worth discussing. Why don't you lay out your thoughts on why, the expectations have raised and we should judge this team differently?
Because they're better than we thought they were. Look, as I wrote, I think it's entirely possible and realistic and reasonable to chop the trees down, but still see the forest. Big picture, program has made tremendous strides, clearly moving in the right direction. Talent is better, coaching is better, excitement is better. Everything is going in the right direction. No doubt about that. I think once the season's over, no matter what the record is, you're going to be able to look back and say that it was a strong, successful first season for Greg Schiano. You're moving in the right direction. That being said, they should have beaten Michigan on Saturday. They had a 17-point lead. The defense collapsed again. They should have beaten Illinois 2 weeks ago. They had a 10-point lead. It's okay to calm out and call it as it is, which is this team is better than we expected. The expectations should be higher. Frankly, Greg Schiano and his coaches and his players, they've earned the right. They deserve. It's only respectful to them, in my opinion, that the expectations be higher. And the bottom line was they were better than Michigan on Saturday night, and they should have won the game. And I think it's very disappointing for Rutgers fans and for Rutgers. I'm sure I don't think they're sitting in the house there saying, hey, it was 52-0 last year and Ash got fired and rah, go us. No, they're mad because they lost the game. They should be 3-2 and thinking about going to a bowl game. Instead, they're 1-4. I just think that you have to, Michigan is Michigan, and I get that. But if they had played Ohio State on Saturday night and lost 48-42 in triple overtime, I would be more kind of sympathetic to the whole what an effort, what a game, look how far they've come argument. But they didn't play Ohio State. They played a Michigan team that they could have beat, they were better than on that night. And I think you have to admit that and acknowledge that they blew a winnable game.
They did. I agree with that. Certainly, that's beyond arguable. They blew a winnable game. I guess I just have a hard time looking at anything that's happening out there without looking at the prism of what happened before. I mean, the fact that they came back, that's the one thing. They did blow a 17-point lead, but then they were down 35-27. And that fourth quarter drive, I don't think we've talked enough about or written enough about 16 plays with a competent offense with moving the ball down the field, Sarge, the throw from Noah Vedral on fourth down for the touchdown, the 2-point conversion. These are things we're just not seeing from this team, right? Where do you fall on the spectrum, Sarge?
Yeah, to close that point, I think it's probably somewhere in the middle on your two debates. It's not the first time that Cratch and Politi have disagreed. They disagree often. My text message chain is proof to that. As far as the final drive, really, and we were talking, during it, I thought they were taking way too much time. There were a couple times where they were running the ball. I didn't think there was a sense of urgency. And it really just spoke to Noah Vedral and having, a quarterback really grow before our eyes. I wrote about him after the game. He really, really played about as well as a Rutgers quarterback has in a few years. He just was calm. That fourth down play was unbelievable. Being able to thread the needle, avoid the sack, and then the 2-point conversion was all willpower. You're right. That probably got lost in the shuffle, kind of got lost in the overtime. But Really just a gutsy performance by Rutgers on that final drive.
He had more yards in that game, passing yards in that game, than Rutgers had passing yards in the five previous games, which I mean, I recognize that speaks more to what was happening those 5 years than it's happening this year. But it's still pretty astounding. So then we get to overtime in that game. Obviously, when Michigan misses the field goal in the first half of the first overtime, I think this is the one time when a lot of fans had issues with the play calling there. My problem is, and Cratch, and I know you disagree with this as well. My problem is that if I second guessed what happened at the end of the Illinois game, that pass that was thrown when it was first down and they should have been running to get the ball in field goal range to win that game, then I can't really kill Greg Schiano and Sean Gleason for being conservative at the first, in this overtime win. They were going to have a 45-yard makeable field goal there. What did you see when you went back and looked at the Kratz that made you think that they handled that wrong?
I didn't so much think they handled it wrong. Like, I agree with you. Like, that's what they want to do. They want to kick the field goal. That's all they needed to win the game. Valentino Ambrosio wanted the ball in the middle of the field. Great. What I just didn't necessarily understand was the way they kind of attacked it. If they had literally just kicked the ball on first down, it would have been a shorter kick than it ended up being.
Right.
That was what I didn't get. The whole idea of you're on I believe it was on the left hash. You're then going to go to the right hash, and then you're going to have to run and lose yardage to get back in the middle of the field. That's what I didn't get. I just didn't understand why you didn't try to run toward the middle of the field 2 times with Isaiah Pacheco, who was having some success. Get a couple yards, and then kick it on third down even, because that way if there's a bad snap or there's a penalty or whatever, you can kind of reassess the situation.
Right. And that really was their opportunity to win the game. Although, again, we're talking about this team being resilient. I think if you're making a list of highlights from this season, I mean, the pass from the misdirection play in the second overtime to Haskins, I mean, it's just a brilliant call, brilliant execution. Watching it again, the way he, Noah Vedra managed to get that ball over the defender's hands and right in the perfect spot for Haskins to catch it and run in. I mean, that was pretty astounding too. Sarge, what overall did you see from the offense there in that overtime?
Yeah, I'm going to argue with you a little bit, Steve, because, and I get it. I heard the same thing that, like, if you're going to rip them for throwing the ball and not running the ball, at the 37-yard line when all you need is a field goal to win the game against Illinois, then how do you do it, in overtime when all you need is a field goal? I get it. I'm not asking them to throw the ball. The one thing I will say is, can you know your quarterback? Can you know your personnel on that, on that overtime? Vedra, was having a great game. And if you trusted him to be your starting quarterback, then you can trust him to either run forward, that delay play, where he was doing the quarterback sneak, that was having success. You could have run a couple plays where you got, a functioning offense. So, instead they tried to be cute on first down. Second down, they lost yardage, and then they had to play catch up on third down, and they took a knee. They lost yardage on third down, settled for a 45-yard field goal, Steve. And again,
it wasn't really a knee. They were running. Was he taking a knee, or was he trying to get yards and got tackled? He was trying to send to the ball.
He slid. He slid, right, Cratch? Yeah, he slid. So, I mean, you're losing 2 yards to settle for a 45-yard field goal. I wrote about it the other day. The percentage of Power 5 kickers a year ago who made 45-yard field goals, they were successful 51% of the time. So it's a coin flip at that point to make a 45-yard field goal with a proven kicker. Valentino Ambrosio, they don't have one. Yep. So, I mean, and look, he had the distance on that ball, and it kind of hooked at the last second. So, again, it's not these are good conversations to have when you're talking about a more competitive program. It's just, I think it's a fair criticism. I think it's a fair criticism to criticize him for the way they played that first overtime.
I mean, if the kick had been from 43 yards out, which it would have been if they had just kicked it on first down, I think he might make it.
If they left it from the right hash mark, he would have made it. That's the sad part.
The other thing, too, I'll say is, and a texter, NJ.com/insider, said this to me. I think it was also said on Twitter by someone. Why not just put Johnny Langan in the game? I know we're probably going to talk about the Langan package later. Yeah. If you trust him all on the ball, just let him run into the Michigan line 2-3 times.
Yep, I agree.
Protect the ball.
If you're playing short yardage, why not go with Langan?
Yeah. Well, that's a good point. That's a really good point. Well, all right. So the bigger issue, again, we're nitpicking the play calling and the offense, certainly. Was the defense. I mean, I don't know, the moment I tweeted it and everyone got mad at me as if I was the one who made Michigan change quarterbacks. But I thought that was the, absolute nightmare scenario where they bring in Cade McNamara, a guy who, for whatever reason, Rutgers and backup quarterbacks, we talked about it last week in the podcast, and the moment he came in, you could tell that he had a better command of the passing game, and his decisions at the line of scrimmage helped the running game as well. Cratch, do you think this was a case of the defense not being prepared, or are we seeing a situation here where, they only have so many people and the personnel is just getting worn out in these games?
No, I don't think I just think Cade McNamara was a better quarterback than Joe Milton. And I think that was a big part of the reason why I think that Rutgers didn't get a lot of pass rush. At the first touchdown, they kind of brought the house and Michigan picked it up and McNamara made a great throw. I just thought, there were guys open earlier in the game. Joe Milton just wasn't making the throws. McNamara did. I think that the run defense, again, it's just, they don't tackle well at times. I thought the linebackers, weren't in position on a couple of those big runs in the second half. I also thought that Michigan kind of took advantage of the aggression and the success that guys like Dwumfor and Julius Turner have been having, letting them kind of get upfield and then ushering them out of the way of the play. Look, I think they get tired. They play a lot of guys on defense, I've noticed, but it seems like when it becomes crunch time, they only trust a certain amount, especially on the defensive line. And I think that's become the issue where there's just not a heavy rotation when the game is on the line. You're seeing Dwumfor and Turner over and over and over again. And look, I had someone point out to me, and it's a fair argument. You could say, hey, maybe we shouldn't expect them to win these games because they lack that depth. But I still think there's enough production early on. If they just kind of play better in the second half, they should be able to hold on to win this game.
It's a weird thing, Sarge. I don't know how you feel about this, but I thought the loss to Illinois, I left me feeling like, all right, we might have seen the best of this team. They might not win again. That's kind of how I felt when I left that game. I left the Michigan game thinking they can win. I mean, there's no game left on the schedule that they can't win. I mean, if they can play out of their shoes against a team that I still think had more talent than Rutgers. I mean, you could argue it certainly, had more better recruiting classes and more talent the last 5 years. I mean, what do you think overall is the lasting, what's going to happen with this team going forward after that game?
Yeah, I mean, I said last week, I think we talked about it. I thought that they would get 2 or 3 more wins, to close out. And I still feel that way. We could talk about it later, but that 13-point line against Purdue, that was, we talk about these lines every week. I thought that was way higher than I expected.
I was stunned by that. I really was.
And Penn State, if you're being fair about it, guys, and, we could probably talk about this down the line, but I think Rutgers could be favored in that game. And only because, the way Penn State's playing and Penn State's clearly, lost some of their talent, and I think there's a chance that game could be, within, certainly within a touchdown. But there's a chance that Rutgers could be favored in that game. Maryland, same deal. Like, we don't even know, if they're going to be, playing that game at this point. So, I think there's a real good shot for Rutgers to close well down the stretch.
Penn State does look like dead team walking. It is amazing. I mean, that is how that thing has spiraled out of control. Just not good.
And I'll say this: Michigan could have packed it in and quit at 17-0.
Yeah,
did it?
Yep.
Which I think, look, Jim Harbaugh is embattled and he's getting hits everywhere. But you got to give him credit for stabilizing that team and finding a way to win a game that they could have very easily just folded up the tent at that point and gotten run off the field.
Excellent point. All right, gentlemen, let's dive into true or false. You know how it works. I'll give you a statement, true or false, and then we'll talk about it later. True or false? Rutgers got hosed by the refs against Michigan with the pick play. James Cratch, true or false?
False.
Sarge?
False.
Wow. Okay. I'll go talk about that because I looked at it again today. I disagree. All right. True or false? Isaiah Pacheco is being underutilized in this offense. James Cratch, true or false?
True.
Sarge?
True.
Shameen Jones is the team's most improved player. True or false, James Cratch?
True.
Okay. Sarge?
I hate agreeing with Cratch, every time, but true.
A hard one. Yeah, I thought maybe we might go with the Reggie Sutton there or someone on the offensive line, but God, the kid's playing really well. All right, true or false? The biggest deficiency for this team is suddenly its lack of a pass rush. James Cratch. True or false?
False.
Okay. Sarge?
Yeah, false.
All right, we'll have to come back to see what you guys think is the biggest deficiency. True or false? Rutgers still should get Art Sikowski on the field. James Cratch.
True.
Ooh.
True. Put that in there after.
I'm going to go false.
Yeah, I just put them in there after Cratch is endorsing him incorrectly for starting quarterback, which I've waited this long to mention, by the way, after last week. All right, and finally, true or false? Northwestern can stun Ohio State in the Big Ten title game if they get there. Cratch, true or false?
True.
Wow, Keith.
False.
False. Yeah, I think that's a big false. And I watched some of that game, but they look good, but I don't know if they're Ohio State good. All right, I do want to. So I was left thinking that if they had a better pass rush, they might have had a better chance against Michigan. You don't think it's what would you put then as the biggest deficiency with this team right now?
Yeah, I was going to say, you know what it might be, believe it or not, is rushing. The running backs, Graciano said it was the best position group on the team, right up there with linebacker. They're 96, nationally in rushing. They were right? Wow. They were 101 a year ago. So they were bad, but they weren't, they weren't down 130 bad. So they were 101 last year. They're 96 now, 10th in the Big Ten. With the talent that they had, that might be, I don't know if deficiency is the right word, but that's probably the biggest disappointment right now.
Right. I was surprised. I put it on the list because I was a little surprised that Pacheco didn't have a bigger role in that game. What was it, 15 carries, Cratch? I get it that they want to mix in. They like Adams too, and he gives them a different look. That said, still, I don't know. I just feel like that guy's such a talent. We've seen what he can do against Big Ten defenses. So what do you think the biggest deficiency is, Cratch?
I'm going to say it's just the secondary, just because I think you got a depth issue there, and there's just guys that we're seeing getting picked on, and look, some of that is because of the pass rush, but we just really have, since the Michigan State game, we really haven't seen that group kind of go out there and shine and make plays.
I feel like there's still a technique issue with a lot of those guys too. I mean, I know that Avery Young didn't turn around the ball. That was the way Chris Ash coached them back in the day. It just seems like there's just something, a lack of consistency is what Greg Schiano put it this week.
No, I agree. I think we talked about this on a podcast a couple of weeks ago, but to his credit, when Ash got fired, that group really regressed. Right. It was his kind of hands-on coaching was gone, and I wonder if that was kind of created maybe a little bit more of a dip for that group than other groups, so there's still a farther way to kind of climb out of it still for Schiano and his staff.
Right. And that doesn't bode well for this week, where Purdue obviously has some NFL caliber talent at wide receiver. All right. So you think they should be getting Art Sikowski on the field still? I mean, I thought that debate, this kind of ended the quarterback controversy forever.
Well, at some point, if you can, over the last few games, yes, you should probably play him a little bit.
Right.
But at this point, too, Noah Vedral had one. It was a great game, and everyone's like completely. But who knows what's going to happen this coming week? He's been very up or down this season so far.
Yes. Yep. Mm-hmm.
So I just come from the perspective of it's kind of now, like if it doesn't happen for Art this year, it's just not going to happen, which is fine. But then Rutgers has to commit to sticking with Vedral as their starting quarterback next year, potentially.
All right. Anything else? Do you want to dive into some Rutgers Insider questions?
Yeah, let's dive.
We got some bunch of them. Thanks again, as always, NJ.com/insider to join the party. We've had a lot of people jump on this season, which has been great because, we're trying to stay in business. All right. And this is a good one, guys. And I know we talked about it a little bit, but just about the big picture about what's happening with this season. Here's the question. I know going into the season, Rutgers had to get at least one win to break the losing streak. Reevaluating after two close losses, does Rutgers have to get at least one more win for a successful season? I mean, it's a great question. And, I guess so. I mean, in a lot of ways, because you don't want to end this season on an 8-game losing streak going into next season. It's going to take some of the shine off, Sarge, if they don't win again.
Yeah, I kind of look more at the big picture. I mean, you can't have it both ways. We go back to what we said at the beginning of the year, where we one of the big things was to be more competitive, and They are. And the bar was on the ground, and now they've raised the bar a little bit. As you always used to say, suck normal, and now they If they're at 1-7 or 1-8 at the end of the year, they would suck normal. 1-8, but more competitive. So you would say that's a goal. But that ultimately, they do get judged by wins and losses. Greg Schiano has said it a number of times that and that would be tough to recruit to. A losing streak like that at the end of the year would be tough to recruit to. So probably a little bit of truth in both in both points.
Yeah, and correct. I was thinking about this earlier today. I mean, if I were to make the list of like the 6 or 7, 8 things that Rutgers had to accomplish, I mean, you'd have to end the Big Ten losing streak. You have to fix the offense, which they did. You'd have to change the narrative around the program. Sarge wrote about that last week. You have to close out this recruiting class, which it certainly seems like they're in the process of doing. You have to compete with the powerhouses. I mean, they almost beat Michigan, and then you have to develop players. So, I mean, they're going to check all of the boxes. But again, I wonder if the narrative does flip if it is a 1-8. What do you think?
I think it's at the end of the day, like you can go 1-8 and it's a successful season, but obviously it's going to feel a little bit kind of empty. I think in some aspects, I think they need one more. If they get one more win, then I think they're set. Definitely it's a successful season. If that one win is Penn State, then you're talking about an unbelievably successful season.
Right. Then no one's talking about anything else but that. Absolutely. All right. Next question from Jeff Steer. I like people who put a name next to it so I can say you gave it to us. All right. I know it's hard for you guys to get close to the team and talk to individual players, but I'd like to get a real sense of the attitude and morale of the players. Losing sucks and can be contagious, but are they really buying the chop thing and bringing it to each practice, et cetera? My sense is yes, but what do I know? Yeah, and Jeff, you make a great point. This is unlike anything we've been around. I mean, you can't, with COVID, we see the players on Zoom calls, and we don't get to see the behavior in practice. I mean, my strong sense is, though, that you've seen a buy-in, and I mean, I think the play, Sarge, in overtime, and overall, I think certainly gives you the sense that the morale is high.
If they haven't bought into the chop mantra, then they are doing an awfully good job of selling it, because
you're faking
literally
it well.
Every third word in a Zoom press conference is chop.
Yeah.
To a point, it wasn't even Cratch or I, but there was another reporter from another outlet who at one point called one of the players and said, "Can you answer that question without using the word chop?" And then the player doubled down on it and added more chop to his quote. So, look, none of that matters. They can say whatever they want. As far as, but they have certainly bought into it. And as far as them, doing it on the field, I think it shows. I think shows in a guy like Mike Tverdoff doing it. And it shows on that fourth quarter drive, that 16 play drive. Yeah. Greg Schiano would say that's like the ultimate definition of chop.
So obviously I know fans aren't at the games. 2 things I will say. One, when you watch pregame warm-ups, it's amazing to me a kicker hit a warm-up kickoff, do the chop thing. His teammate. And the second thing is the guys who are not suited up, injured guys, walk-ons who are not going to play in the game, they're all kind of in sweatsuits on the sideline together with their masks on. Those kids go bonkers, like a student section from
they were trying
the middle of the first kickoff to the end of the game. They are going nuts on the sidelines. I think that's a team that's 100% bought in to what Greg is preaching and the culture.
That's a credit to Greg Schiano, because we talked about the home field advantage, and in the Big Ten, it just doesn't exist. I think it was 11 and 15 was the home field advantage teams in the Big Ten. And Greg Schiano said, he's been studying it. He's been trying to try to get his team a clear home field advantage. Look, they're 0-3 at home. So ultimately, you are what you are. But, that what Crash just brought up with the guys behind him, the guys who aren't playing, he was trying to get that atmosphere, that home field, the student section type environment. You got to think of Greg Schiano is always trying to think of little ways to kind of give his team an advantage.
Right. And you can't fake it. We've seen teams. I mean, you look at what's happened. I mentioned Penn State. You could just tell the intensity is not there. Even Nebraska. There's just teams in this league where you're like, something's wrong. I don't think that's certainly the case. It seems like Rutgers has the buy-in and then some. All right. Here's a question about Vedral. Even after his 400-yard performance, have you ever seen a quarterback with as weak an arm as Vedral be that effective in a major conference college football game? Because I haven't. That's so. I'm not sure it's true. And you watched the film. You went back through it, Christ. You saw every play. I mean, the throw to Shameen Jones for the touchdown at the end in the fourth quarter. That was a big time throw. I mean, am I wrong? Do you think it's as weak as we're letting it out to be here?
No, I don't. I think the way I've kind of classified Vedril's arm, I think I've written in the past, is like it's just strong enough.
Right.
Look, does he have a bazooka like Patrick Mahomes? No. But
it's not. It's not Justin Herbert. I get right.
Is he an NFL prospect? No. But his arm is strong enough, I think, to make. Look, I think Rutgers would definitely be better off as an offense if they could stretch the field more vertically. But that being said, he does make enough throws to keep a defense honest. I think his arm is just strong enough to make the throws he needs. And no one's coming to mind right away, but I mean, definitely not even talking about option teams. There have been teams that have won with weaker arms, in college football, just because so much of that air raid stuff is that.
Guys, he's completing at passes at 64.2%. A Rutgers quarterback hasn't been that accurate in 5 years. No one's been over 60% in 5 years. No one's been that high for a season. I mean, look, the interceptions have been bad, but he's completing at such a high accuracy. I mean, that's more important than throwing the ball 70 yards on a dime. I'm sorry, but being able to complete your attempts at that rate, that shows that you're extending drives, and that's what you want in your quarterback. It's one of the most important statistics that there is, the completion percentage.
Absolutely. All right, we have a lot of questions about kicking. I'm going to summarize them in with a couple of them. Does Rutgers have a kicker who can get kickoffs into the end zone? Well, they did have one last year. He's still on the roster, so I assume so. Or is kicking to the 5-yard line a strategic decision? And another one, I don't believe the new kicker has had more leg or accuracy than Justin Davidovitz. What happened to him? I think this is just going to be every year we seem to have one guy or one player who becomes the mystery for the season. I can't even think of who it was last year that we feel like we got 8,000 questions about. I mean, what is it? What is it with this Cratch? I mean, do you buy into the idea that he should be kicking into the end zone? He could kick in the end zone, and do you think the right kicker is lining up field goals?
So I'll start with the kickoff. It is everything I've seen. And look, this is one of these kind of weird things with 2020. Not a complaint, just a reality. The press conference over the video is so limited, and you only have so many cracks at the bat that you don't necessarily get to empty the notebook like we would in the past.
Right. Yeah.
Everything I've seen is it's strategic decision. The touchdown aside the other night, they've been one of the best kickoff teams in the Big Ten. So it's been working. As for Davidovitz, I will say this. I think that Valentino Ambrosio, from what I understand, talking to people, was a lot more of a known commodity in terms of as a kicking prospect. Like people, when he was in high school, he was such an elite soccer player that he was able to play high school football, and people knew he was good. I had one coach tell me, kind of sarcastically, if Chris Ash knew what a Group 1 school was, he probably would have found this guy. Because I believe he started at Roselle Park. When it was Fava versus Davidovitz, it was weird. When it's Ambrosio versus Davidovitz, I think that while it's still kind of unproven for Ambrosio, I think that physically there might be more upside with him than with Davidovitz.
He's got a big leg. I mean, that kick from 45, the distance was not the issue. I mean, that was something. All right, let's see what else we got here. Not complaining. Is there anything that can be done differently to finish the games so we win? What changes should be made? I mean, he's not complaining.
No, he is complaining.
He's maybe a little bit. Is there, like I say to my wife, is there anything I can do that you will put the dishes in the dishwasher after lunch? Is there I'm not complaining. I'm just curious if there's some action we can take here that would get that done. I don't know. Is there one? I guess there's really not one thing. It's just, and I wrote this, and it's a hard thing to quantify. But Sarge, it's a team learning to win, right? I mean, you have to learn to compete first, and then you take the next step. They just haven't taken it yet.
Yeah, it's the little things. We talked about the defense tiring. The defensive line. Bending. Late. Not getting as much pressure as they did early in the game when they were up 17-0. You could point to a few curious coaching decisions that we've talked about, and ultimately, just boils down to learning how to win. And, again, you have to, say when you're looking at them, being outscored in Big Ten play by almost 3 touchdowns per game, the last couple of years to now, it is better. But, those, they do have the players who are back, they have not experienced what it's like to win. And sometimes that's one of the things that you need to learn, at this stage of the program.
All right, here's another one we touched on a little bit, but let's dive into it. What is the actual rule with regards to that intentional pick play that went for a TD for Michigan? I thought that should have been a penalty. I did too, and I watched on the replay. I didn't think it was as bad when I saw it live as I did when I saw the replay. I mean, the kid clearly knocks into the receiver crash. I mean, what is the –
Look, it was a pick play.
Right.
And as I wrote in the film review, I think it definitely violated the spirit of the law.
There's interpretation to it.
But I don't know if it necessarily violated the letter of the law, blatantly. And if it doesn't do that, then the officials are not going to call it.
Right.
Basically, you cannot, as a receiver, run directly into the defender. But you can kind of run toward him and stop.
Yep.
And kind of
But there was contact, though. I mean, what?
There was contact.
He didn't force the contact, but he didn't force the contact. The receiver just turned his head, as Cratch pointed out. The receiver turned. If you think about it, it kind of makes sense. So, like if you're making just a stick route or like a button hook, that happens on a play, right? So basically, he tried to sell it that way, stopped, forced the traffic, and he didn't force the contact, and that's the reason why. There's interpretation. And as Cratch pointed out, if you look at the play and give, look, I can see both ways. My inbox on Twitter it's the reason why I asked Graciano the question, to close the post game. And he said, rather,
cagey.
Yeah, cagey for sure. Like, I just can't answer the question. Yeah. Like he just was not going to go there. He told us how he felt, but there, if the receiver doesn't make the force the contact, which he did not, all he did was stop, turned around. Then the interpretation there is that he did not, interfere.
All right, this is a great question. It's a big picture thing going forward. And I'm going to paraphrase because it's a long one. Since this year does not count for eligibility, the seniors could theoretically come back for another year. But how does Greg Schiano manage that? If it's still 85-25 with scholarship limits and knowing that he's recruiting well and needs to, keep the numbers coming in. And this is a good point here, that the transfer portal is likely to be loaded with some talent after the season as well. Then the final part of the question is, I'd like to hear more about how that will be managed. How many scholarships will Rutgers hold for seniors / portal targets? Do we have any idea, Cratch? I mean, are we just guessing, I guess, at this point?
We don't, and actually, Shauna last week was asked about this and said it's going to be difficult, and there's going to be a lot of uncomfortable, awkward, unpleasant conversations he's going to have because they've got to make the numbers work. And I think the number one issue is, can Rutgers, not even Rutgers, but any team in the country, can they afford to pay for these extra scholarships? I think that's a big question, one. Mm-hmm. Number two, I think is going to be, of these high school recruits, 2021 kids, how many of them are actually going to come to college versus, hey, I didn't have much of a high school season, let me go prep for a year potentially. Is that going to kind of help Rutgers and other schools with the number? Yeah,
and it's a fascinating thing, Sarge. I assume that those difficult conversations, they're going to try to want to talk players like Melton to come back and everyone on the defensive line. But then these kids have to make a decision. Not kids anymore, so in their early 20s, they have to make a decision too. I mean, how much college football can you play before you just have to decide to move on?
It's a great question. And for a developmental program like Rutgers, you would think that this would be an advantage, right? Because, Graciano said often, like grown men, there's a difference between grown men and 18-year-olds. And especially if you don't have blue chippers like Rutgers, they don't have now. They have 2 4-star prospects, recruits in their entire program right now. Some guys have exceeded that expectation. Some guys haven't. But, the point is, they don't recruit the guys who are instantly as freshmen, ready to go. So you would think that experience would help. Same token, what Cratch is saying is right. Like Rutgers, yes, the NCAA will be allowing you to go above 85 a year from now. Will Rutgers be willing to pay for 100 scholarships total? It's not Rutgers being cheap. But a lot of other Big Ten schools and schools nationwide are going to have that same question. going to be one of the most fascinating questions of the offseason. And then, long term, for anyone who does go to 100 or so, it's going to be even a bigger problem for the junior and sophomores because the NCAA has given no indication that they won't go right back to the 85 cap. So if you're a junior and you have extra eligibility now, and then you want to play in 2022. Then they're going to be facing the same issue, especially with the 85 scholarship cap.
Right. I will say, and just the bigger picture thing, I think this is the kind of thing that Greg Schiano is going to be good at. Like he is, the CEO of the program, the manager. I think that that plays to his strengths. All right, those are the questions we have this week. Thanks everybody again. NJ.com/insider. Sign up early and often. Let's dive into the Purdue preview here, fellas. And like I said earlier, I mean, this is that game. I came away feeling that they could win the rest of the games. I was stunned that Purdue was a 13-point favorite, bigger favorite than Michigan was. I get that the Boilermakers are good. They score a lot of points. It's a home game for them. They've got Rondo Moore back. I get all that stuff. Sarge, what's your takeaway in this game? Who do you like, and how do you see it unfolding?
Yeah, Purdue really good offensively, Rondell Moore is probably the best offensive player that they'll face all year. He's an NFL guy, going to be probably a first-round pick. He's back. What's fascinating about him, Steve, is they had a quarterback who was averaging over 300 yards per game. He got hurt in the Northwestern game. His name's Aiden O'Connell. He got hurt in the Northwestern game, did not play. Jack Plummer, who is no relation to Jake Plummer. A lot of people think, Jake Plummer, Jack Plummer. No relation. Jack Plummer came in and threw for 367 yards against Minnesota, completed 83% of his passes. They didn't have a drop-off whatsoever. The one thing we know about Jeff Brom can coach offense. So that is going to be the fascinating thing. Kratch has made a point with the secondary, huge challenge for the secondary. I think Rutgers is going to have to score some points.
Right, and the fact that we're talking about Rutgers thinking they got jobbed by that call. I mean, Purdue had a win stolen from them by the Big Ten refs. Yeah. I mean, there's no question that was unbelievable. That was how bad.
There was no contact whatsoever. The wide receivers, the tight end, I think was caught the ball in the end zone. No contact whatsoever, and they call him an offensive pass interference.
It's amazing. Sometimes you're like, oh, what are people screaming about now? And you go watch the replay, like, and you watch that, you're like, oh my God, how in the world? Kratch, so pick a score. What do you got, Kratch? Sorry, you didn't give us a score yet.
Ooh, God. I think Purdue's going to win it 30-24.
Okay. Kratch, your thoughts on the game?
So it's a big game for Greg Schiano, because remember 2018 at Ohio State, Purdue, boat raced them.
He'd like to forget.
In West Lafayette.
Yeah.
Well, that's why I found like when they played the Buckeyes a couple weeks ago, and I think an Ohio State reporter too got on the call, and they asked me, reflect on his time at Ohio State, and it kind of went bad there at the end, and I'm thinking to myself, they won the Rose Bowl, and they're like, hey, it really kind of fell apart at the end there, Greg.
Oh man,
it's amazing. Like we're sitting here and even us, being objective and skeptical, and in Ohio State, it's like, well, I mean, it really went bad at the end there when you won the Rose Bowl. But
we're sitting there wondering, hey, that was a good loss to a bad Michigan team. Hey, what do you think, fellas? Yeah,
exactly.
Won the Rose Bowl.
Yeah, I think it's gonna be a little bit more high scoring than Sarge. I'll go like Purdue 41, Rutgers 30.
Okay.
So I guess they'll cover. I just think Purdue's defense is kind of up and down. I'll be honest with you, I've written this before. I've always thought Purdue's been a little bit overrated under Jeff Brom. I know they've had a couple of big upsets, but they're like a 500 team under him. But I do think it's a really tough matchup going out there with their passing attack and Rondell Moore back, on Thanksgiving weekend. It's a really tough matchup. Bad spot for Rutgers.
All right. Yes. And I think I'm going to go in the other direction. And it's funny because I joked during the game on Twitter, like my job was a lot easier as a columnist to come up with opinions when I knew it was going to happen. Like when you're watching these games and I don't know who's going to win this game. What are we going to write? It's just like a new, and the same thing with picks. Like I think I've been wrong almost every week now because it's just like, you go with your gut sometimes, you go with your head sometimes. I'm going with my gut this time. I think, I just like what I've seen from this team. They come up with something every week. It's not Purdue defensively is not great. I think Rutgers is going to go in there and steal a victory. I see something like a 38-35 final second, get the second win, get Cratch off their back victory for Greg Schiano and the Scarlet Knights. We'll see if I'm right. All right. Well, anything else to talk about? Basketball? I mean,
so Thanksgiving's coming up. I do want to say I'm thankful for one thing. Cratch, you have to agree with me on this one, but our fearless podcast leader, host, Steve Politi, is in, folks, we get to see what everyone's doing. We're doing these Zoom calls now, and he is literally behind a box. We're trying to improve our audio. Anyone who's been listening to our podcast for a long time know that we've had some issues with our audio. He's behind a screen, sweating. I'm looking at him. He is so struggling, but you wouldn't know it. I'm thankful as I think about my Thanksgiving. That's what I'm going to talk about. Heroic performances, Cratch. You talk about Geo Baker with the thumb, playing through that last year, playing as well. This goes up there, in my opinion. The way Politi has gutted out this podcast, got to be one of the most heroic performances I've seen in a long time.
That's a big 2020 praise. I really appreciate that, Sarge. Jeez. I had no idea how so inspiring to you, just because
I'm watching it. You are really struggling.
Yes, I'm sweating. So just to set the scene, my wife built, because again, we sounded like we were recording off 2 tin can fishing line. My wife built this little thing where she put sound panels into a cardboard box, and it's great. I mean, it sounds great, except that when I sit in here and the radiators are on in the house, it is 115 degrees. So that's what I do for you guys. So for once, you can actually, hear what we say during the podcast. Cratch, you want to jump in?
No, I was going to say, so we're taping this at Monday afternoon. Wednesday at 7, Rutgers is supposed to play Sacred Heart in basketball. School still hasn't announced the game yet. I think we are going to have a weird college basketball season.
What is the problem with this? I just don't understand it. I mean, there's only 7 non-conference games, right? Is that
the women's basketball team is obviously they're going to open against Monmouth 11 a.m. on Wednesday.
Okay.
And my understanding is that you can't even have a traditional, men's women's doubleheader anymore because of all the cleaning protocols for the rack.
Right.
You literally have to play the game at 11 because you need several hours to disinfect the place.
The first time that place has been cleaned in 37 years. Oh, come on, that was too easy.
But no. So, the Big Ten has kind of set a rule where if you are a non-conference opponent, that opponent has to do antigen testing the day before the game, the day of the game. The rule says if one player or coach in the traveling party tests positive, game is off. And I asked, and it didn't seem like they were necessarily going to do what the Big Ten does with its coaches and athletes, where they PCR test to confirm that it's a true positive and not a false positive. So I'll be honest with you, if it's one positive that could be a false positive, which we know is more likely with the antigen tests, if that's all it takes to cancel a non-conference game, I don't see how we're going to see very many non-conference games played this year anywhere.
Yeah, I tend to. I don't know how you feel about the Sarge. Rick Pitino keeps on tweeting that they should move this season to March and have May Madness. It makes more sense every time he does. I just don't see any path forward to a season without interruptions and cancellations. With football, you can cancel one game and maybe you can get, but with basketball, if you're going to go and quarantine, you can miss 4 or 5 games.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, your roster is so much thinner than your typical football program, and all these guys are hanging out, as we saw with football, with the football team's outbreak. When they have these outbreaks, that it's the same position group. So if 2 guards get it, then all the guards are going to get it because they all hang out together. So I agree. I mean, I think if you're talking about, the ultimate goal is to have a tournament, just push it back. I mean, to me, it's a no-brainer. I will say I've talked to people about Rick Pitino's sentiments. I have not heard any momentum, at least as far as in the Big Ten. I've talked to people. There will be a story coming out at some point this week on it, but there's no momentum toward that.
We'll see what happens, I guess.
The other thing I'll say is I do, and Rutgers is not doing this, I do not understand, not pile on a Seton Hall, but it's ridiculous that they're going to Louisville to play a game. Arizona State was going to go to Mohegan, might still go to Mohegan. What are you doing? There's not enough.
But look, Rutgers is going to have to go to Iowa at some point. Have you seen numbers there? If you're just talking about
I agree. I guess what I'm saying is that's a conference game. You
Right.
know, like
It's
that.
still
Like
ridiculous,
it is.
still.
Like I agree with you, but like at least that's in a conference game. The idea that someone would like willingly go, let's go across the country to a casino in Connecticut to play
Yeah, it's weird.
basketball. It's like just play someone else. You know, find a team that can drive in. You know, there's plenty of them.
All right. Well, hopefully next week, when we come back on Monday, we will have basketball to talk about. We will certainly have football to talk about. Rutgers, Purdue on Saturday. Everyone have a great Thanksgiving. Safe, happy. Eat your turkey alone. We'll be back on Monday to talk about next week's game. Thank you for listening.
Looking for a new podcast to listen to? Here's what we love, courtesy of Acast Recommends.
Hey there, this is Pete Lang-Stanton. I'm on the audio team at Vice News, and I want to tell you about a new podcast that we've been working on. It's called Source Material from Vice News. This show is trying something a little different from other news podcasts. Instead of having a host or reporter tell you the story, Source Material presents global stories through the recordings of the people who were there on the ground filming. Our team at Vice News for this show, we're just trying to get out of the way and let you experience the primary sources for yourself. Check out Source Material, now on Apple Podcasts.
Acast
Recommends.